Hello, creepers. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and drop in the comments the worst place you can imagine during a zombie outbreak. Now let's get to it. The sea was black and endless, stretching out beneath a gray sky that smelled of salt, oil, and fear. Our landing craft rocked hard against the waves as we cut through the channel. I gripped my rifle so tight my knuckles ached. Around me, the men of my squad sat in silence, some praying under their breath, others chewing their lips bloody. We were told this would be the longest day of our lives, the beginning of the end for the Nazis, the moment history would turn. But none of us really knew what that meant. We had been briefed about machine guns, barbed wire, artillery. We had been told the Germans would fight like hell to keep us off the French coast. We had been told to expect death. But what none of us expected was the silence. The horizon was lit by the thunder of naval bombardment. Battleships behind us hurled shells into the cliffs of Normandy, explosions blooming like fiery flowers. The ground shook even from miles away. Normally, we would have expected return fire, heavy guns roaring back, tracers slicing the sky. But the shoreline was dark and still. Not a single muzzle flash, not a single answering shot. "Where the hell are they?" one of the guys muttered, his voice nearly swallowed by the growl of the boat's engine. Nobody answered. I shifted uncomfortably, staring past the steel ramp of the Higgins boat at the vague outline of the beach. The spray of the ocean stung my face, cold as knives. My stomach churned, but it wasn't seasickness. Something about the scene ahead gnawed at me. The silence felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something we weren't prepared for. A sergeant tried to break the tension with a joke, muttering about how maybe the Germans had already surrendered and gone home. A few men forced out nervous laughs, but the sound died quickly. No one really believed it. We'd all heard the stories, how hard the Germans fought, how they never gave up ground without blood. The ramp clattered as it shifted slightly, chains rattling. My heart slammed against my ribs. I caught a glimpse of the beach through the gap. At first, it looked deserted. Flat sand, broken fences, jagged obstacles waiting to rip our boats apart. Then I saw movement on the ridge, shadows against the smoke. Dozens of them. "They're up there," someone whispered. "Get ready." But the silhouettes didn't look right. They weren't soldiers in helmets, crouched behind machine guns. They weren't taking cover or setting up defenses. They were drifting, staggering. Their shapes lurched forward in strange, jerky motions, like puppets with tangled strings. The guy next to me swore under his breath. "What the hell are they doing?" I tried to convince myself it was just the distance, the smoke, the way the light bent through the haze. But unease was already crawling up my spine, cold and sharp. Those figures didn't move like men waiting to fight. They moved like something else entirely. The closer we got, the clearer they became. Their uniforms were torn and ragged. Their bodies were hunched, twisted, wrong. I saw one tumble headfirst down a slope, only to stand again as if its bones hadn't broken. Another stood facing the sea, its head tilted back at an unnatural angle. I wanted to ask if anyone else was seeing what I saw, but the words stuck in my throat. "Ready!" the sergeant barked, his voice cutting through the fog of dread. He raised his rifle, and everyone followed. Boots stomped against the wooden floor as men braced themselves, ready to charge the instant the ramp dropped. The boat slammed against sand. My breath caught in my chest. "Go! Go! Go!" The ramp screeched as it lowered. For a split second, I expected machine gun fire to rip us apart, but no bullets came. Instead, we were met with the sight of the figures on the beach turning toward us all at once. Dozens of faces, pale and ruined, jaws hanging open, eyes blank and lifeless. Their uniforms were stained dark with old blood. Some had holes in their helmets. Some were missing pieces of flesh. They weren't men waiting to fight. They were something dead, something hungry, and they were waiting for us. The ramp slammed down and sunlight flooded the boat. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the things on the beach screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was raw, guttural, like rusted metal tearing apart. They charged us in a frenzy, arms outstretched, teeth snapping. Their movements were clumsy but fast, faster than anyone expected. The first man out didn't even get 3 steps before one of them tackled him. His rifle went spinning into the surf. He screamed as teeth tore into his throat, spraying blood across the sand. Another soldier tried to pull him free, but more of the creatures fell on both of them, dragging them down in a heap of thrashing limbs. Panic erupted. "Open fire!" the sergeant roared. The deck of the boat lit up with muzzle flashes as we unloaded into the horde. Bullets ripped into them, tearing chunks of flesh and bone. But it wasn't enough. I watched one take a full burst to the chest and keep coming, stumbling forward until someone finally put a round through its skull. Only then did it collapse, twitching in the sand. "They don't go down!" someone screamed. "Aim for the head!" But nobody was listening. Men were firing wild, bullets punching holes through torsos and legs that didn't seem to matter. The beach turned into chaos. Soldiers stumbled out of the boats only to be met with swarms of the dead pouring down from the bluffs. I forced myself forward, stumbling into the water, cold waves soaking my boots. The surf was already red, bodies floating face down, torn open. The screams were everywhere. Shouts for medics, cries for mothers, the choked gurgles of men being eaten alive. I raised my rifle and fired. One of the creatures dropped, the back of its skull exploding in a spray of bone. Another lunged at me, its mouth gaping wide, eyes clouded white. I jammed the barrel of my rifle into its teeth and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked me off my feet, but the thing fell, jaw split in 2. Around me, order collapsed completely. Officers tried to rally their men, but the dead swarmed too quickly. A corporal was dragged screaming into the surf. Another soldier's flamethrower burst to life, the fire sweeping across the sand and igniting dozens of the creatures. Their bodies burned, but even then, they staggered forward, shrieking as they collapsed in flames. The radio on one of the men's backs crackled through the gunfire and chaos. "All beaches reporting heavy contact. Enemy not human. I repeat, not human. God help us, they're everywhere." The transmission dissolved into static and screaming. I stumbled toward cover, a half-destroyed wooden barrier on the sand. 2 men crouched behind it, firing non-stop into the horde. One of them turned to me, his helmet tilted back, eyes wide with terror. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. His voice cracked. "We were supposed to fight Germans." Before I could answer, the other man screamed. One of the dead had leapt the barricade, knocking him onto his back. Teeth sank into his cheek, tearing it clean away. Blood sprayed, his cries gurgling as the thing ripped at his face. I shoved my bayonet forward, the blade punching through the creature's skull. It went limp instantly, collapsing across the dying soldier. The survivor beside me stared at me, trembling. "What the hell are they?" I had no answer. The beach was already lost. I could see it in the way the dead overwhelmed every landing craft, tearing through men before they even had a chance to fight. Some boats never even made it to shore, capsizing under the weight of swarming figures that waded into the surf, dragging soldiers down beneath the waves. "Fall back!" the sergeant bellowed, his voice raw. Find cover! Get off the beach! We ran, tripping over wreckage, bodies, barbed wire. The ground was littered with helmets and rifles, the sand stained black and red. A tank that had barely made it ashore was already overrun, its hatch pried open, the crew inside screaming as hands pulled them out one by one. I fired until my rifle clicked empty. My hands fumbled to reload, shaking so badly I dropped the clip into the sand. A shadow loomed over me, a creature in a torn German uniform, its jaw dangling loose, blood crusted around its collar. It lunged, arms wide. A shot rang out beside me. The creature's head snapped back, a hole blown through its skull. It dropped like a stone. I turned to see the sergeant, sweat and grime streaking his face, reloading his rifle with calm, practiced hands. "Keep moving!" he shouted, dragging me by the collar. I didn't argue. Together we stumbled toward the seawall, where clusters of survivors were trying desperately to regroup. The dead pressed closer with every step, their numbers endless, their screams drowning out the thunder of the naval bombardment. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't even war. It was slaughter. The seawall loomed ahead like salvation, a jagged line of concrete and steel rising above the chaos. Men were already clustered behind it, firing out at the swarms pouring down from the bluffs. The sand in front of the wall was a killing ground, littered with broken bodies and shattered weapons. The sergeant yanked me by the collar until we stumbled into the relative shelter. My lungs burned as I pressed against the rough stone, gasping for breath. "Keep your head clear," he barked, though I could hear the strain in his own voice. "We're not dead yet." Not dead yet. I risked a glance over the wall. The beach was a nightmare. Dozens of landing craft still trying to make shore were swarmed before they even hit the sand. The water churned with thrashing figures as the dead pulled men under. The air was a constant chorus of screams, gunfire, and that inhuman wailing of the creatures. A private beside me was trembling so hard, his helmet rattled against the wall. His rifle slipped from his hands, landing in the sand. He didn't even bother picking it up. His eyes were wide, fixed on the surf. The sergeant grabbed him by the shoulder. "We move inland. Now. Staying here gets us killed." The private shook his head. We can't. His voice broke into a sob. The sergeant didn't waste another word. He shoved off the wall and waved to the handful of survivors nearby. "On me." We cut through the defenses. Bunker complex ahead. We take it, or we die here. It wasn't a request. I gritted my teeth, picked up my rifle and followed. A few others did the same. We darted from cover, weaving through twisted metal and torn bodies. The ground shook as shells from the ships hammered the cliffs, throwing dirt and rock into the air. The blasts cut down some of the dead, but more spilled out of trenches and craters, drawn by the noise. One lunged from the smoke, its face half gone, jaw swinging loose. I slammed my bayonet into its skull and shoved it aside. The private behind me screamed, firing wild into another that rushed him. The bullets tore holes in its chest, slowing it, but not stopping it. The sergeant ended it with a clean shot to the head. "Headshots only," he shouted again. "Don't waste ammo." We pressed on. The beach behind us was lost. There was no saving it. Every step forward was survival. As we reached the base of the cliffs, we found other stragglers, men who'd managed to crawl from overturned boats or fight through smaller packs of the dead. Some carried wounded comrades, their faces pale, arms bitten and bleeding. The sight made my stomach twist. I knew what it meant, but no one wanted to say it aloud. One of the wounded stumbled, nearly falling. His friend tried to lift him, whispering, "Almost there, buddy. Just hang on." but the man's skin was already gray, his eyes glassy. The sergeant's jaw clenched, but he didn't stop them. None of us had the heart to. Not yet. The bunker entrance was just ahead, set into the cliffside, its door half blown open by the bombardment. We rushed toward it, gunfire cracking, grenades blasting apart clusters of the dead that blocked our path. The closer we got, the more desperate the fighting became. They seemed endless, spilling from trenches, crawling from shell craters, their shrieks echoing over the roar of explosions. I don't remember how many I shot. I just remember the recoil hammering my shoulder, the sting of gunpowder in my eyes, and the burning ache in my arms as I slammed clip after clip into my rifle. At one point, I swung the stock like a club, caving in a skull when the bayonet jammed. At last, we forced our way to the bunker door. The sergeant kicked it open, the heavy steel groaning on ruined hinges. The inside was dark, damp, stinking of mildew and burnt powder. But it was shelter. "Inside! Move!" We stumbled in, one after another, dragging the wounded and slamming the door shut behind us. The sudden silence inside felt unnatural after the chaos outside. Only the muffled thud of explosions and the distant, hungry screams seeped through the walls. Men collapsed against the walls, shaking, weeping, or sitting in stunned silence. Some reloaded with trembling hands. Others just stared at the blood on their uniforms, as if only now realizing it was there. I sat against the cold stone, breathing hard. The darkness pressed in around us, but for the moment, we were alive. For the moment, we had found shelter. But I knew the truth deep in my gut. This was no victory. The beach was gone. The invasion was shattered. And whatever those things were, they weren't finished with us. The bunker stank of rust, mold, and blood. Every surface was damp, and the walls seemed to sweat with the weight of the war above. Our boots echoed on the concrete as we pushed deeper inside, rifles at the ready. For the first time since the landing, I felt a roof over my head, but it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a tomb waiting to seal itself. The wounded were dragged in last. One man was missing half his leg, his face gray, and his screams ragged. Another clutched his side where teeth marks had torn through his uniform. His buddy kept insisting it was just shrapnel, but we all knew what it really was. The bitten man's eyes were already glassy. We set them down against the wall. The place filled with groans, not just from the injured, but from our own men, whispering prayers or curses. The sergeant told us to check our ammo. I did. I had 10 rounds left, maybe enough for 10 more chances at living. My hands trembled as I slid the clip back into the rifle. One of the privates started crying. He couldn't have been older than 19. "We should have stayed on the boats," he muttered. "We should have never come." His words carried in the bunker like they had been carved into stone. No one answered. We sat in silence, listening to the muffled thud of artillery outside and the distant, awful moans of the dead drifting in through cracks in the bunker walls. Then the silence broke. A choked scream tore through the dark. I spun, rifle raised. It was the bitten soldier. His body had gone stiff, his chest heaving. His friend knelt beside him, begging him to hold on. But I saw it happening. The man's eyes rolled white, his lips peeled back from his teeth, and his fingers clawed at the ground like hooks. He wasn't dying. He was changing. The sergeant's voice cut like a whip. "Get back!" The soldier beside him refused. He held his friend's shoulders, shouting his name, trying to shake him awake. But the thing that had been his buddy snapped forward and tore into his throat. Blood sprayed across the bunker wall. Chaos erupted. Men stumbled back, tripping over each other in the cramped space. The dead man gurgled as his friend's screams turned wet and muffled. By the time I raised my rifle, the friend was already thrashing, blood pouring down his chest. The two of them writhed together on the floor, one dead, one dying. Both lost. The sergeant didn't hesitate. He fired his pistol twice. The shots rang deafeningly in the bunker, and the two bodies fell still. Smoke hung in the air, the stench of gunpowder and gore mixing with mold. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to admit what we had just seen, that the bite was a death sentence, and keeping the wounded alive was only delaying the inevitable. The man with the missing leg began to cry out, begging us not to leave him, not to kill him. His stump bled through the bandages, and his voice cracked with terror. Another soldier asked the question we were all thinking. "Sergeant, what about him?" The sergeant's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the floor, pistol still warm in his hand. Finally, he spoke, low and grim. "We can't carry him. And if we keep him..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The man screamed then, thrashing, pleading for mercy. Every word tore through me like barbed wire. He was one of us. He had landed on the beach with us, fought beside us. And now we were about to do to him what the enemy never could. The sergeant gave the order. One of the older soldiers stepped forward. His face was pale, but his hands were steady as he pressed the barrel of his rifle to the wounded man's head. The screaming stopped only when the shot echoed through the bunker. The silence afterward was unbearable. Nobody looked at the body. Nobody wanted to. I leaned against the wall, bile rising in my throat. My heart hammered, not just from the sound of the gunshot, but from the truth that settled over us like smoke. Survival wasn't just about fighting the dead. It was about what we were willing to do to the living. The sergeant finally broke the silence. "We move soon. We can't stay here. They'll smell the blood. Everyone check your gear. Get ready." His voice was iron, but I saw the crack in his eyes. The weight of what he had ordered was crushing him too. We obeyed, silent and hollow. My rifle felt heavier than before. The dead waited outside, but it was what had just happened inside that I couldn't shake. The cost of survival wasn't just blood on the beach. It was blood on our own hands. And I knew this was only the beginning. The bunker was never meant to hold us. It was a coffin carved from concrete, with too many shadows and not enough air. The dead would be on us soon. We all knew it. The sergeant rallied us with a voice that cut through the gloom. "We move. Now, ammunition tight. Stay quiet if you can. We're heading inland. Stick to me, or you won't last 5 minutes out there." No one argued. After what had just happened inside, silence was our only answer. We filed toward the rear exit, a steel door warped from shell fire. It took 3 of us to shove it open, the screech of metal echoing down the hall. For a heartbeat, I swore that sound alone would summon the horde. Outside, the air hit us like fire. The sun was climbing, burning through the smoke and turning the battlefield into a furnace. The stench of charred flesh carried on the wind, mixed with salt and gunpowder. The beach was far behind now, but the moans of the dead carried from every direction, like the land itself was groaning. We advanced up a narrow trench carved into the hillside. Dirt crumbled under our boots. The trench had been German once, but now it was littered with corpses, some still in Wehrmacht helmets, others in American uniforms. Not all of them stayed still. One of the bodies twitched, then sat up with a snap of its neck. The private behind me panicked and jammed his bayonet down into its skull. The sound was wet and final, but it echoed like a scream. "Keep moving," the sergeant barked. We obeyed. We had no choice. The trench wound upward until it spat us out into open ground. That was when we saw them. Dozens, no, hundreds of the dead spilling from the tree line above the cliffs. They staggered and stumbled, but their numbers blotted out the hills like a tide rolling in. We sprinted. Bullets rang out as we fired in bursts, not to kill them all, but to clear just enough space to push through. My rifle bucked against my shoulder. A zombie in a tattered officer's coat lunged at me. I drove my bayonet into its chest, but it didn't stop. I had to twist the rifle up and jam the blade through its eye before it collapsed. My arms shook as I pulled the weapon free. The ground ahead was a nightmare. Burning hedgerows, craters filled with water and floating bodies, a wrecked Sherman tank smoldering in a ditch. The air was thick with flies. Every step forward was like running through hell itself. One of our men stumbled. His boot caught on barbed wire. Before we could pull him free, the dead swarmed. They dropped on him like wolves, teeth sinking into his arms and legs. His screams followed us, even as the sergeant dragged the rest of us onward. We left him behind. We had to. Gunfire erupted to our left. For one wild moment, I thought reinforcements had arrived. But when we turned, we saw the truth. Another squad of Americans, maybe a dozen, fighting in a crater. They were surrounded, backs pressed together, rifles blazing. The dead closed in from all sides. The sergeant hesitated. If we helped them, we'd risk being overrun ourselves. If we didn't, they were finished. His jaw clenched, torn between orders and survival. "Fire! Cover them!" he finally shouted. We unleashed everything we had. The trench walls cracked with our shots. Zombies dropped left and right, but more crawled over their corpses. The trapped soldiers seized the chance. They broke from the crater, scrambling toward us. Not all made it. I watched 3 men vanish beneath a wave of clawing hands, their screams silenced in seconds. The survivors, 5 of them, stumbled into our line, faces pale, uniforms soaked in blood. Together, we pushed on. The noise brought even more of the horde. Their moans rose into a single terrible cry that shook the air. We were running out of time. Ahead, the ruins of a farmhouse stood like a blackened skeleton against the smoke. "There!" the sergeant shouted. We made for it, cutting down anything in our path. My rifle clicked empty. I rammed another clip home with shaking hands, barely aiming as I fired into the mass. The farmhouse loomed closer. One of the survivors fell, dragged down in the mud by grasping hands. Another turned his flamethrower on the pack, and fire roared to life. The flames lit the field in orange, consuming both dead and living alike. The man screamed as fire washed over him, but the blaze bought us seconds. Seconds we used to reach the farmhouse door. We kicked it open and poured inside. The sergeant and 2 others slammed it shut, throwing beams and debris across it as a makeshift barricade. The walls shook with the pounding of fists. The moans outside swelled, hungry and endless. Inside, we collapsed against the soot-stained walls, lungs burning, ears ringing. We had made it another step inland, but at what cost? We had lost more men than we had saved, and the dead weren't stopping. They never stopped. The farmhouse smelled of smoke and rot. Broken furniture lay scattered. Bullet holes riddled the walls. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else sobbed. The sergeant looked at us, his face gaunt in the dim light. "We can't stay here long. They'll tear this place apart. Rest while you can. When night falls, we move again." I sank to the floor, rifle across my lap. Outside, the pounding of the dead never stopped. Their fists drummed against the wood like a funeral march. This was no battlefield anymore. This was purgatory, and we were still marching through it. The pounding on the farmhouse walls had never stopped. All night, the dead hammered and clawed, their fists like drums against the wood. We tried to rest, but every slam jolted us awake. The boards bent with every strike, and the moans outside rose like a choir of hunger. The sergeant kept watch near a cracked window. His face was pale in the moonlight, eyes hollow from exhaustion. When dawn broke, he gave the order. We move. If we wait here, we die here. We never got our chance in the night. The pounding pinned us down. Now, dawn is all we have. We gathered what little ammunition we had left. My rifle carried barely 2 clips. A few grenades were passed around like they were gold. One of the rescued soldiers still had a flamethrower, but the tank was half empty. The sergeant's plan was simple and desperate. Break out, push toward the hedgerows, and pray we found another squad or stronghold. The barricade groaned as we pulled it down. Sunlight spilled inside, and with it came the shadows of the dead pressing against the door. When we shoved it open, the horde flooded forward. We fired into the mass, each shot deliberate. Heads burst, jaws shattered, and bodies collapsed only to be replaced by more. The flamethrower hissed, spewing fire across the front line, buying us precious seconds as we broke into the open. Smoke and ash filled the air. The farmyard was worse than we feared. Dozens more lurched from the fields, drawn by the commotion. Their uniforms hung in tatters, skin blistered by fire and rot. One still wore a German officer's cap, the brim soaked in dried blood. We sprinted, cutting through them like knives through water. The ground was slick with mud and gore. A man ahead slipped, falling hard. I grabbed his arm, yanked him up, and shoved him forward. The dead nearly caught us, their fingers scraping my pack as I pulled free. We crashed through the hedgerows, branches tearing at our faces. Beyond lay a field scarred by shellfire, cratered and scorched. In the center, a wrecked half-track smoldered, its steel twisted from explosions. The sergeant pointed. "There! Rally point!" We dug in around it, forming a circle. The dead poured from the trees, their moans carrying over the smoke. Ammunition snapped dry one after another. Grenades thundered, sending limbs flying, but the tide didn't break. One of the crater men screamed as they pulled him down. His rifle clattered beside me, and I fired until the bolt clicked empty. Another man was dragged screaming into the dirt, his voice silenced in seconds. The circle tightened, blood painting the ground at our boots. The sergeant's pistol barked until it was empty. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "Hold the line!" he shouted, even though the line was already cracking. Then I heard it, the low thunder of engines. At first, I thought it was more tanks burning, but the sound grew, steady and alive. From beyond the ridge, the roar of aircraft filled the air. P-47 Thunderbolts, their silhouettes black against the rising sun. Flares shot skyward from somewhere behind us. Someone had made contact. Artillery thundered moments later, shells raining fire on the tree line. The ground shook, dirt and corpses thrown high into the air. The horde scattered, some blown to pieces, others staggering blindly through the smoke. For the first time since landing, hope cut through the haze. Reinforcements were close. We weren't abandoned after all. The sergeant seized the moment. "This is our chance! Move now!" We broke from the half-track, sprinting through the smoldering field as shells pounded behind us. My lungs burned, legs screaming with every step. But I didn't stop. None of us did. The smoke thinned, and I glimpsed movement ahead. Silhouettes of more Americans, rifles raised, waving us forward. Survivors. Allies. A chance. The sergeant's voice tore through the chaos. "That's our lifeline! Push!" We ran with everything we had left, every muscle burning, every heartbeat pounding louder than the dead behind us. For the first time since the ramp dropped, survival didn't feel impossible. It felt just barely within reach. But I knew the dead weren't finished. Not yet. The field was burning behind us, artillery pounding the tree line into mud and fire. The roar of engines still thundered above, fighter planes strafing the hills where the dead had gathered. But the dead didn't stop. Even with shells tearing them apart, they crawled, limped, and staggered forward. The smoke hid their numbers, but we could hear them, that endless moaning chorus chasing every step. The sergeant waved us on, his voice raw. "Move! Don't stop! We're close!" We stumbled across the cratered field, ducking when machine guns rattled ahead. For one awful moment, I thought we had stumbled into German fire at last. But the bursts were aimed past us, cutting down the shapes that shambled through the smoke. American helmets glinted in the distance. More survivors. Scattered men like us, who had managed to regroup and dig in. We charged toward them, lungs burning. A man in a foxhole waved us forward, shouting over the gunfire. "Get in! Hurry!" The sergeant shoved us down into the trench. The relief of seeing other Americans was almost enough to knock the breath from me. Dozens of men were dug in, rifles braced on sandbags, firing in controlled bursts. A machine gun chattered steadily, its barrel glowing red. The stench of cordite and blood hung heavy. "Where's command?" the sergeant demanded. A lieutenant, mud-smeared and hollow-eyed, shouted back. "Scattered. HQ's gone. We're holding until evac comes through. Radio says fallback point inland. If we don't reach it, we're finished." Evacuation. The word lit a spark of hope in my chest. But before it could take hold, the ground shook. The dead poured over the ridge in a wall of bodies. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The artillery had thinned them, but not enough. They came like a tide, spilling over one another, teeth snapping, arms clawing. "Positions!" the lieutenant screamed. The trench erupted in fire. Rifles cracked, machine guns roared, grenades arced into the mass. For a moment, it worked. The front ranks crumpled, bodies piling up. But the tide never stopped. They crawled over their own dead, shrieking, reaching. One soldier panicked, breaking cover and running. He didn't make 10 steps before they swarmed him. His screams didn't last long. The sergeant grabbed my shoulder. "We don't hold this line. We'll be buried here. We need that evac." "How far?" I asked, shouting over the chaos. The lieutenant's answer was grim. "Half a mile, through the woods. If we break now, maybe we make it. If we stay, we're dead." There was no time to argue. The trench was already buckling. The machine gun jammed with a metallic screech. The dead surged closer, tumbling into the ditch. A soldier swung his entrenching tool like an axe, splitting a skull before teeth closed on his arm. Blood sprayed. "Fall back!" the sergeant bellowed. We broke from the trench in a desperate rush. Bullets snapped overhead, soldiers firing as they retreated, trying to keep the horde at bay. The woods loomed ahead, dark, tangled, but maybe a path to survival. We crashed through the trees, branches clawing at our uniforms. The dead followed, slower in the undergrowth, but still relentless. Their moans echoed between the trunks, an unholy hunting call. Men dropped one by one. Some tripped and never rose again. Others fought until the mob buried them in claws and teeth. I kept running, legs numb, lungs burning. I couldn't look back. At last, the woods thinned and a clearing opened ahead. Trucks, half a dozen of them, engines rumbling, soldiers waving us forward. A radio mast jutted from the ground beside them, its antenna glowing faint in the dawn light. The fallback point. The sergeant's voice cracked as he shouted, "Go! Go!" We sprinted for the trucks. Behind us, the dead burst from the tree line, pouring into the clearing in a tidal wave of rot. Gunfire erupted from the perimeter as defenders unleashed everything they had. I dove onto the back of a truck, hands pulling me up. Others scrambled in beside me, some covered in blood, some missing helmets, all with the same hollow stare. The sergeant was the last to climb aboard, shoving another soldier up before pulling himself over the tailgate. "Move it!" he roared. Engines howled. The convoy lurched forward, tires spitting mud. Soldiers on the tailgates fired into the pursuing horde, cutting them down as the trucks bounced over churned earth. Still they came, chasing us out of the clearing, their moans stretching into the sky. The road ahead was a scar of rubble and smoke. Burned out farmhouses, wrecked vehicles, bodies both German and American. The trucks swerved around obstacles, never slowing. For miles, the dead chased us. Some clung to the trucks, clawing at boots and packs until they were beaten loose. One dragged itself onto the tailgate, its jaw unhinged, teeth snapping inches from my arm. I shoved my bayonet forward, steel punching through its skull. It tumbled away, vanishing beneath the wheels. Finally, mercifully, the sound of pursuit thinned. The trucks roared onto a road lined with friendly armor. Shermans, half-tracks, even field guns. Soldiers cheered as we rolled past, their fire cutting down the last stragglers of the horde. For the first time since the ramp dropped, I felt something close to relief. We had made it. Not victory, not even safety, but escape. The sergeant leaned against the truck's side, his face drawn and pale. He met my eyes, voice rough. "Remember this. The dead don't stop. Not for trenches, not for bullets, not for anything. Wherever we go, they'll follow." I looked back. The smoke of the battlefield curled on the horizon, the moans of the horde faint but still there, carried on the wind. He was right. We had escaped. For now. But the war had changed. The dead were part of it now, and they weren't finished. The convoy rolled for miles before the guns behind us finally faded. The road wound through ruined fields and shattered villages, every mile lined with the wreckage of war. Burned out tanks, horses lying in the mud, farmhouses torn open like broken teeth. For the first time in what felt like years, the moans of the dead were far behind. No one spoke. The trucks rattled and groaned, carrying men who looked less like soldiers and more like ghosts. Helmets hung loose, uniforms were caked in dried blood, rifles clutched more from habit than purpose. The only sound was the engine's growl and the hollow thud of boots shifting as we swayed with the bumps. I stared at the sky. The smoke was thinner here, the sun brighter. Birds wheeled high above, as if none of what we'd endured on the beach or in the bunkers had ever happened. For a moment, I let myself believe we'd outrun it, that the nightmare had drowned in the surf. But I knew better. The sergeant sat across from me, jaw set, eyes shadowed. Since the convoy started rolling, he'd barely said a word. His hand rested on his rifle like it was part of him. Finally, he broke the silence. "This isn't over," he said, voice low, but certain. What we saw today, it spreads. Men bitten turn. Doesn't matter if it's minutes or hours, they change. We leave them behind, but they don't stay behind. No one answered. No one had to. We all knew the truth of it. The truck slowed as the convoy reached a crossroads where engineers had raised makeshift barricades. More soldiers waved us through, their eyes wide when they saw our numbers, or what was left of them. We were funneled into a field where tents had been pitched in a rush. Medics shouted orders, guiding the wounded onto stretchers. Chaplains moved quietly among the men, offering words that sounded more like apologies than prayers. I climbed down from the truck, and my legs nearly gave out. The field was crowded with survivors from other beaches, some bandaged, some missing limbs, some staring at nothing. There were fewer of us than there should have been. Far fewer. A general stood on the bed of a jeep, shouting to make himself heard. "The invasion continues. Reinforcements are coming. We hold this ground. We push inland. Whatever we face, we drive them back." His words rang with steel, but his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't seen what we had seen. The sergeant pulled me aside, speaking under his breath. "They'll learn soon enough. The dead don't care about lines on a map. They don't break. They don't surrender. This isn't just Normandy. This is everywhere," I wanted to argue. To tell him he was wrong, that this was an outbreak confined to the beaches. But deep down, I felt it too. The silence of the landing, the tide of bodies that never seemed to end, the way every scream had been swallowed in the same hunger. It wasn't local. It was a plague. As night fell again, I sat near the field's edge, staring at the horizon. The guns were still thundering in the distance, but the echoes felt different now. They weren't fighting Germans alone. They were fighting the dead. A medic walked past, carrying a lantern. Behind him, a wounded soldier groaned on a stretcher, his eyes half closed, lips moving soundlessly. His skin was gray. His arm was bandaged thick, but dark stains spread through the cloth. The medic didn't notice, but I did. The lantern's light caught the man's eyes as they rolled back, milky white. His jaw twitched, his hand clenched, and I knew, before the first scream tore through the camp, that the nightmare had followed us inland. It had never been left behind.